"You're late," or "Are you calling me a liar?" The words cracked like a whip across the store. The delivery driver, fresh off a grueling night shift and barely able to catch his breath, was humiliated in front of everyone. What he didn't know was that the quiet customer standing nearby was the CEO of the entire pizza chain. And in just a few moments, the real boss would take action. Have you ever been insulted at work and forced to stay quiet, the memory of it burning long after? Or have you always stood your ground, refusing to let anyone treat you with disrespect? Jackson Reeves sat alone in his office, the dim glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows over the mountains of printed customer reports. The words began to blur, but the message remained brutally clear. Cold pizza. Deliveries an hour late. Employees with terrible attitudes. It was the kind of feedback no CEO ever wants to see, but Jackson forced himself to read every single one. He used to know this company like the back of his hand. After all, he had built it from a single walk-up window on the west side of Indianapolis to over 40 locations across the Midwest. He'd poured his youth, his savings, and his weekends into it. For years, it had been his pride, his proof that doing things the right way, honestly and consistently, could actually work. But now it felt like something rotten had wormed its way into the cracks. He flipped to the next report. Same store, same complaints, again and again. The worst part? His regional manager, Bradley, had insisted that things were under control. The numbers told a different story. Sales were sliding, customer retention had nosedived, and turnover was so high that HR could barely keep up. Whatever was broken, this wasn't just a bad week. It was a pattern. Leaning back in his chair, he exhaled a breath that seemed to carry a month's worth of frustration. The paper trail told part of the story, but Jackson knew from experience that some truths don't show up in reports. You have to go out and find them. He stared at the ceiling for a moment, then straightened up. If this was going to be fixed, it wouldn't be by firing off emails from a distance. He needed to see the problem for himself, not as a CEO, but as a customer. It was a bold, risky, perhaps even ridiculous idea. But Jackson had a small advantage. He hadn't done a press interview or public appearance in nearly 4 years. Most new employees would have no idea what he looked like. By midnight, he had a plan. A hoodie, a pair of scuffed jeans, cheap drugstore reading glasses, and an itchy brown wig, just enough to look like a tired guy ordering dinner. Not the founder of the entire chain. He placed an order through the app, a large pepperoni with extra cheese, from the store that had racked up the most complaints in the last quarter. Store number 17, on the east side of Indy, the same location Bradley had repeatedly claimed just needed stronger employees. Estimated delivery time, 30 minutes. He sat back on his worn-out couch, phone in hand, his eyes flicking to the clock on the wall. 30 minutes passed, then 40, then 50. At the 58-minute mark, Jackson was ready to give up, not just on the pizza, but on the very system he'd spent a lifetime building. Then came the knock. He opened the door. A young man stood in the frame. His hair plastered his forehead with sweat, his uniform wrinkled, his chest heaving from breathless effort. His name tag read Jason. Exhaustion was etched into every line of his face, but he still managed a small, honest smile. It was just enough to say, "I showed up. Sorry I'm late," Jason said quietly. "It's been a rough night." Jackson took the box. He hadn't planned to say much, just observe. But something about the kid's voice, the raw fatigue spoken without a hint of self-pity, made him pause. He tilted his head. "Busy night?" Jason let out a dry chuckle. "Yeah, I'm the only one on delivery tonight. Was supposed to be 3 of us. One quit, the other called out. So it's just me." Jackson frowned. "One person covering the whole district?" Jason shrugged. "I need the hours." Jackson hesitated. "They paying you overtime at least?" Jason's smile vanished. He looked away. "Technically, yeah, but my manager cuts my hours on other days, so I don't go over full time. Says it's company policy." Jackson felt it like a punch to the gut. That wasn't policy. That was theft. And the kid standing before him wasn't just a tired worker. He was proof that something was broken and festering in the very heart of his empire. He tightened his grip on the now stone-cold pizza box. "What's your name?" Jackson asked, his voice lower. "Jason." Jackson nodded. That name stayed with him. Heavy, sharp, etched in his mind like a warning. He had seen enough. This wasn't a fluke, and he wasn't going to sit behind a desk and watch it happen anymore. Jackson stood frozen in the doorway, the cold pizza box in his hands, his mind entirely on the young man before him. Jason didn't fidget or apologize again. He just stood there, quietly absorbing the tension in the way people who've worked too many hard shifts learn to do. Jackson truly looked at him, not just the wrinkled uniform or the sweat-slicked brow, but his posture, the way Jason shifted his weight from one foot to the other, as if his body was trying to remain polite, while his muscles begged for rest. The silence stretched. Then Jason forced a soft, weary smile. "Anyway, hope the pizza's still good. Sorry again for the delay." Jackson blinked, having almost forgotten the food in his hands. He nodded once. "Thanks." Jason turned to leave, walking slowly back to his car, an old, dented Corolla idling at the curb, its passenger door taped shut. Jackson stood at the threshold a moment longer, then stepped back inside, gently closing the door. He placed the pizza box on the counter, but didn't open it. His appetite was gone. What he felt wasn't anger. It was deeper, a hollow dread that settled in his chest and refused to move. Jason's face wouldn't leave his mind. Neither would his words. Technically, yeah, but they cut my hours on other days. That was not how this company was supposed to run. He had implemented a clear policy. Any overtime worked is paid in full. Period. No manipulation, no hour-shaving games. But policies on paper meant nothing if people like Rick Turner, the store manager, ignored them and got away with it. Jackson picked up his phone and opened the store's review page. The most recent ratings mirrored what Jason had just lived through. 45 minutes late, pizza cold. Delivery guy looked exhausted. Felt bad, even complaining. Manager yelled at staff while I was waiting. Unprofessional. Then one review, posted just 3 days ago, caught his attention. Saw the manager scream at a younger employee in front of everyone because he messed up the sauce. It wasn't even that bad. The poor guy looked like he wanted to cry. Manager said, "If you can't do the basics, maybe you should go mop floors instead." It was awful to witness. I won't be coming back. Jackson clenched his jaw. That wasn't just bad leadership. That was abuse. Plain and simple. He scrolled further. The same patterns on different dates. Multiple customers described the same tone: disrespect, exhaustion, indifference. The next morning, Jackson woke before dawn. This time, there was no disguise, no wig, just an old Navy t-shirt, a faded pair of jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his brow. He didn't need to hide. Not today. Today, he wasn't playing the outsider. He was stepping into the storm. The parking lot of store number 17 was mostly empty when he pulled in, just a few cars scattered near the back. The building itself looked worn. The red trim was faded, and one of the menu signs outside flickered from a faulty bulb. He walked in through the front door. The scent of garlic, cheese, and overworked dough filled the space, familiar, nostalgic, and yet slightly sour. The tile floors needed mopping. The front counter was unattended. After a moment, a young woman, maybe 18 or 19, emerged from the back. Her name tag read Alyssa. She didn't smile or even make eye contact. She just looked numb. "Hey," Jackson said gently, just grabbing a slice and a drink. Alyssa nodded, rang him up, and handed over a paper cup without a word. He took his tray and walked to a booth near the kitchen window, far enough away to observe, but close enough to hear. It didn't take long. From the back, a voice thundered through the thin walls. "This dough is garbage." "Are you kidding me?" The voice belonged to a stocky man in his 40s, wearing a grease-stained manager's shirt and a permanent scowl. "I've told you 3 times already. Do it wrong again, and you're staying until close." A younger male voice mumbled something inaudible. "Speak up," the manager barked, "or go home and don't come back." Jackson didn't need to see their faces. He knew this was Rick Turner. The employee, who looked barely out of high school, kept his head down, tossing the ruined dough with shaking hands. There was no guidance, no correction, just pure dominance. And then Jason walked in. He looked even worse than the night before. Same wrinkled uniform, dark circles under his eyes. He moved as if every bone in his body was protesting. He grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and walked to the counter. "You're back already?" Alyssa asked without looking up. Jason nodded, picked up another shift. Needed the cash. Jackson's stomach turned. Moments later, Rick reappeared, squinting as he spotted Jason. "You're late," he snapped. Jason blinked, confused. "No, I'm not. I was scheduled for noon." Rick stepped forward, his voice rising. "I told you yesterday to come in at 11. Don't play dumb." Jason stood his ground. "No, you didn't. So now I'm a liar?" Rick shot back. The sentence cut through the store like broken glass. Jason said nothing, but he didn't have to, because just a few feet away, Jackson Reeves, founder, CEO, and now silent witness, was done watching, and everything was about to change. Rick Turner didn't even notice the man sitting in the corner booth. His focus was locked on Jason, who now stood frozen near the drink station, an unopened bottle of water in his hand. The tension between them crackled like static. Alyssa glanced up from the register, then immediately looked back down. No one said a word. No one intervened. Jason didn't respond. He didn't have to. Jackson Reeves had seen enough. He stood up, calm and deliberate. His footsteps echoed quietly as he approached the counter, every step sharpening his conviction. Rick turned his head slightly, then fully, noticing Jackson for the first time. His eyes scanned the man, t-shirt, baseball cap, jeans. Just another customer, probably with a complaint. "You need something?" Rick asked, irritation already lacing his tone. Jackson didn't blink. "Yeah, I need you to explain to me why you're treating my employees like this." The words hit like a thunderclap. Alyssa's eyes went wide. Jason stiffened, the soda bottle slipping slightly in his grip. Rick's face cycled through confusion, then suspicion. "Excuse me?" Jackson reached up and pulled off his baseball cap. He looked Rick square in the eye. "Recognize me now?" Rick's mouth fell open. The color drained from his face. "Mr. Reeves? I didn't know you were." "Exactly," Jackson said sharply, cutting him off. "You didn't know, and that's the problem. Because I shouldn't have to be here in person for my people to be treated with basic respect." The store fell completely silent. Even the low hum of the pizza ovens seemed to fade. Every eye in the room was on Jackson and Rick, who, after months of barking orders and dismissing concerns, was suddenly the smallest man in the building. Jackson's voice was calm but firm, measured like steel. "My office. Now." Rick swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." His voice cracked. He turned and walked stiffly toward the back hallway, his steps leaden with the weight of every action he'd ever taken here. Jackson followed close behind. Jason watched him go, his expression unreadable, his lips pressed in a tight line. Alyssa stood motionless, staring at the register as if she wasn't sure what reality she had just stepped into. The back office was as dismal as Jackson imagined, cluttered with outdated calendars, a flickering fluorescent light overhead, and the stale smell of burnt cheese and mildew. Rick stepped inside first, clearly flustered, turning as Jackson closed the door behind them. "I didn't know you were planning to visit today," Rick began, trying to sound steady. "That's exactly the point," Jackson replied, his gaze locked on him. "Because if I have to announce my arrival for people to act like human beings, then it's not real leadership. It's theater." Rick's shoulders tensed. "Look, running this place isn't easy," he said defensively. "Half these kids don't care. They show up late, they mess things up, they act like they deserve a trophy just for clocking in." Jackson stepped forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Funny, because what I saw was a young man, Jason, working a double shift alone, covering the entire delivery route by himself, and still showing up the next day. What I saw was a cashier. So burnout, she can't even look a customer in the eye. What I didn't see was a single ounce of leadership coming from you." Rick's jaw clenched. "You don't get it. I'm doing what I have to do to keep this place running. You try managing this circus when people call out, steal supplies, and quit without notice." Jackson cut him off. I've read the complaints. Customers getting cold orders, missing toppings, rude service, and every single thread traces back to one thing: your management. Rick didn't speak. His jaw worked, but no words came out. You're cutting hours to dodge paying overtime. That's not company policy. That's your policy, Jackson said, his voice now ice cold. You're playing games with people's livelihoods. Rick's face darkened. You think you can run this place better than I can? Be my guest. Jackson didn't flinch. You're right. I can, and I will. The silence thickened. Rick's defiance began to crack, replaced by dawning realization. You're firing me. Effective immediately, Jackson confirmed. Pack your things. You're done here. Rick's nostrils flared. You can't just walk in here and expect everything to magically fix itself. Swapping me out won't change a damn thing. Jackson's gaze didn't waver. No, but it's a start. Rick let out a bitter laugh and shook his head. Well, good luck with this mess, he muttered, brushing past Jackson and shoving the office door open. As he stormed out, Jackson stood alone, letting the silence settle once more. Then he exhaled slowly, steadying himself. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Outside the office, the store was eerily quiet. The staff had gathered near the front counter, unsure what they had just witnessed, but fully aware that something fundamental had shifted. Rick's departure was sudden, loud, and final. The sound of the office door clicking shut seemed to echo across the tile floor. Jackson stepped out a moment later. His expression was calm, but focused. Jason stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching cautiously. Alyssa glanced up, her hand still frozen over the register. The dough station worker, Trey, stood with flour-covered hands, looking as if he hadn't moved in minutes. Jackson looked around the store, his gaze landing on each face, one by one. I'll keep this brief, he said, his voice clear and steady. This store has been run the wrong way for a long time. That ends today. No one moved. The weight of the moment held them all in place. Alyssa hesitated, then asked in a soft, careful voice, So, he's really gone? Jackson nodded. Yes, and from now on, things will be different. Jason shifted slightly, the tension in his shoulders relaxing just enough to let out a shallow breath. But a quiet disbelief remained in his eyes, the look of someone who couldn't imagine anyone at the top caring enough to step in. He spoke up, his voice low but even. Different how? Jackson didn't hesitate. No more cutting hours to avoid paying overtime. No more yelling at employees like they're disposable. And no more expecting one person to work short-staffed while management hides in the back. The room stayed quiet, but something subtle began to change. Skepticism was turning into attention. The workers, who had been moving like ghosts, were now looking directly at him. Not because they had to, but because maybe, just maybe, they wanted to. I'm not here to give a speech and leave, Jackson continued. I'm staying for the rest of the day. I want to see what it's really like on the floor, and I want to hear from each of you. Jason raised an eyebrow. You're working with us? Jackson nodded. Starting now. A beat of silence. Then, for the first time that morning, Jason cracked a smile. Not a forced, polite one, but a real one, small, tired, and genuine. Jackson rolled up his sleeves and stepped behind the counter. The staff exchanged uncertain, hesitant, but intrigued glances. A CEO in sneakers and a T-shirt, asking for an apron. It didn't feel real, but there he was. Alyssa blinked, then handed him a ticket from the register. Pickup order. Just a cheese pizza, she said. Jackson took the slip and turned to Jason. Show me how you guys make this. Jason hesitated, then nodded. He moved to the prep station, pulling a dough ball from the cooler and slapping it onto the floured surface. His hands moved with muscle memory, flattening, stretching, and spinning it gently in the air. Jackson watched every motion, absorbing the rhythm, the care, the instinct. When Jason nodded for him to try, Jackson stepped forward and pressed his palms into the dough. He stretched it, pressed the edges, then attempted the toss. It landed awkwardly on the table, off-center and uneven. Jason chuckled under his breath. Not bad for a rookie. Jackson smiled. He wasn't embarrassed. He felt grateful for the honesty, the unfiltered feedback, and the chance to rebuild something the right way. For the next several hours, Jackson worked shoulder to shoulder with the team. He answered phones, folded pizza boxes, and loaded bags for deliveries. He even rode along with Jason for 2 drop-offs. The first was to a family with a newborn. The second, to an elderly man who tipped Jason with a handful of quarters and a smile. Each moment wasn't just work. It was evidence, proof of who these employees really were, what they endured, and what they gave without being asked. When they returned, Jackson gathered everyone in the dining area. The lunch rush had passed. The air smelled of flour and garlic, and the lights buzzed quietly overhead. "Okay," he said, standing near the soda fountain. "I've seen enough to know this team is giving more than it's getting. So here's what's going to change." The team turned toward him. "First, overtime will be honored. Always. If you work the hours, you get paid for them. No exceptions." Alyssa glanced at Jason, who gave a small nod. Quiet relief spread through the room. "Second, we're hiring more help. Jason can't keep doing deliveries alone, and the kitchen can't keep running short every week." Trey nodded, the first sign of agreement he'd shown all day. "Third, this store needs a manager who actually values your work. Until that person is in place, I'll be dropping by regularly. No more operating in the dark." A younger worker in the back, who hadn't said a word all morning, finally spoke up. "You're really coming back?" Jackson looked at him and answered without hesitation. "I built this company from nothing, but somewhere along the way, I lost track of what really mattered. That stops here." And in that moment, something shifted. Not a speech, not a slogan, a turning point. Later that afternoon, the dining area had quieted down again. Jackson sat at a booth, wiping flour from his forearms. Jason approached, his delivery bag still slung over his shoulder. "You thought about quitting, didn't you?" Jackson asked, his voice low. Jason didn't answer right away. He ran a hand through his hair and exhaled slowly. "Yeah, honestly, I almost did." Jackson nodded. "I don't blame you, but I want to make this a place worth staying." Jason studied him for a moment, his expression steady, skeptical, but not closed off. "If things really change," he said finally, "I'll stick around." Jackson extended his hand. Jason looked at it, then took it, a firm, resolved handshake. No sales pitch, no empty promises. Just action, just truth. The moment passed quietly, but its message hung in the air. That evening, Jackson returned to his office. The familiar glow of his desk lamp illuminated the same piles of reports, but something felt different. The numbers hadn't changed, but he had. He opened the store's online scheduling system, and his jaw tightened all over again. Shifts were stitched together like a patchwork quilt sewn by a blind man. Some workers were scheduled back-to-back until midnight, then expected to open the next morning. Others were barely getting 10 hours a week, just enough to disqualify them from benefits. It was pure manipulation, designed to wear people down. Firing Rick was necessary. But now came the harder question. Who would lead? Not another outsider with a clipboard. This team needed someone who knew what it was like on their side of the counter. His phone buzzed. A text from Bradley, the regional supervisor. "Heard something happened at store 17. What's going on?" Jackson stared at the screen, then typed back. "I stepped in personally. There were serious problems. I'll explain tomorrow." He put the phone down and began drafting a company-wide email to all managers. The subject line was short and unambiguous. Effective immediately. The message was firm and crystal clear. Any store found manipulating schedules to avoid paying overtime will face immediate audits and administrative review. This is not negotiable. Treating our people with dignity is not a slogan. It's a requirement. No more wiggle room. No more excuses. The next morning, Jackson arrived at store number 17 before sunrise. The morning crew was already in motion. Alyssa was slicing vegetables. Trey was rolling dough. Jason stood at the prep counter, organizing delivery bags. Jackson stepped inside quietly. "Ever thought about being a manager?" Jason looked up, startled. "Me?" Jackson nodded. You know this store. You know what's broken. And more importantly, you care. Jason was caught off guard. Honestly, I never really saw myself as that kind of person. I've always just tried to get through the day. You worked a double shift alone and showed up again the next day, Jackson countered. You spoke up when things were wrong. That is the kind of person who should be running this place. Jason looked around the store, the place he had almost walked away from just days before. He watched Alyssa laugh softly at something Trey said. The tension that used to hang like fog had started to lift. He looked back at Jackson. If I take this, Jason said, I need to know it comes with real change. I'm not going to enforce the same stuff that broke people. Jackson didn't flinch. Fair enough. If you step up, you'll have a direct line to me. No middlemen, no red tape. If something's wrong, you tell me. Jason paused, then nodded slowly. All right, I'll give it a shot. Jackson held out his hand again. This time, Jason didn't hesitate. And this time, it wasn't just a handshake. It was the beginning of something new. The transition didn't happen overnight, but it started quietly, steadily. Over the following weeks, store number 17 began to transform. Jackson stayed involved, not as a distant executive, but as someone who kept showing up. The staff stopped treating him like a guest and started seeing him as part of the crew. Leadership came naturally to Jason, not in a loud, commanding way, but through quiet authority. He asked questions before giving orders. He listened before deciding. He remembered what it felt like to be unheard. More staff were hired. The delivery schedule was rebuilt from the ground up. No more solo runs. No more brutal shifts disguised as favors. The kitchen ran smoother. The register line moved quicker. Even the customers noticed. One elderly man left a handwritten note on a napkin. This place feels human again. Slowly, pride began to return to the store. One afternoon, Jackson sat in a booth, reviewing reports on his tablet. Sales were stabilizing. Turnover was down. Customer reviews had climbed from 2 stars to 4 in just 3 weeks. He was reading a comment about improved service when Jason approached with a small delivery bag. You order something? Jackson asked. Jason shook his head with a smile. No, it's from the whole crew. Everyone chipped in. Curious, Jackson opened the bag. Inside was a neatly boxed pizza, still warm. Resting on top was a folded piece of paper with a message in thick black marker. Thanks for actually listening. Jackson looked up, stunned. Jason just shrugged. We figured it was the least we could do. Jackson nodded, unable to speak for a moment. After years of chasing numbers and expansion goals, it was this, a $10 pizza and a handwritten note, that finally reminded him why he'd started this company in the first place. He closed the box gently. Alyssa was patiently helping a teenager at the register. Trey was cracking jokes with a new hire. And Jason had already turned back to the prep station, focused and steady. Jackson sat back, the warm light of the dining area casting a soft glow over everything. I'll make sure it stays this way, he whispered to himself. He wasn't just talking about pizza. He was talking about people. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't just running a business. He was finally leading one. The following Monday, Jason arrived early. He liked being there before the noise started, checking the dough, proofing himself. There was something calming about it. The air was no longer filled with tension. Alyssa and Trey were already prepping relaxed. They didn't say much, but the way they moved said everything. By 11 a.m., customers started filing in. Jason manned the front, greeting regulars by name. He noticed the little things now. A new driver fumbling the insulated bags. Jason didn't criticize. He showed him the right way with a calm tone. He didn't lead with fear. He led by being present. Mid-shift, Jackson stopped by unannounced. He grabbed an apron, helped fold boxes, and wiped down counters. He and Jason exchanged a brief look of acknowledgement. Their trust had become something unspoken. Later, Jackson watched as Jason handled a small dispute between 2 employees. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't blame. He just listened and fixed it. 10 minutes later, both employees were back to laughing. Jackson leaned against the wall, nodding quietly to himself. This was what leadership was supposed to look like. That evening, after closing, Jackson called a short team meeting. "I just want to say thank you," he began. "The past few weeks have shown me more than any spreadsheet ever could. This store isn't perfect, but it's already better because of you." He turned toward Jason. "And especially because of the person who stepped up when everything was falling apart." Jason shifted awkwardly. "I didn't really step up," he mumbled. "I just didn't want it to get worse." Jackson smiled. "Sometimes that's where real leadership starts." Jason looked at the others, who now saw him not as the overworked delivery guy, but as someone who had earned their trust. He looked back at Jackson. "I just don't want us to go back to the way it was." Jackson's reply was immediate. "We won't." And everyone believed it. Later, as they locked up, Jason lingered behind, walking the floor one last time. The job didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like something worth protecting. Jackson waited by the door. "You ready to go?" Jason nodded. They stepped out into the cool night air. "I meant what I said," Jackson told him. "If you ever feel this place slipping back, I want to hear it. No chain of command, no filters." Jason glanced at him, serious now. "You'll actually listen?" Jackson looked him in the eye. "I did before, didn't I?" Jason didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. He locked the door behind them. And for the first time, it truly felt like his store. A few weeks later, the difference was undeniable. The store felt alive. Staff showed up early because they wanted the place to run well. Mistakes were handled with accountability, not blame. Reviews kept improving. One woman wrote, "This used to be my least favorite location. Now it's the only one I trust. Whoever's running it now, keep them." Jason had even implemented a short, daily huddle. It wasn't corporate or scripted, but it worked. Jackson kept his promise. He showed up, sometimes for a slice, sometimes just to sit in a booth and watch the people who now made the place better than he ever had. On one of those days, Jason walked over and placed something on the table. It wasn't a report or a complaint. It was a small, framed photo of the team. Alyssa, Trey, the new hires, and Jason, with sauce on his sleeve. They were crowded behind the counter, smiling, holding a pizza box like a trophy. Jackson raised an eyebrow. Jason just said, "We figured it should go in your office." Jackson looked at the photo for a long time. "I forgot how much this matters," he said finally. Jason shrugged. "We didn't. That was the moment, that quiet shift from me to we, from founder to follower, from distance to trust." Later that night, Jackson returned to headquarters. He walked past his executive suite and sat in the small break room, the framed photo beside his coffee. He pulled out a notebook and started writing not policies, but principles. The first line he wrote was simple. "You cannot run a business from a spreadsheet." The second, "If you don't listen, your best people will stop showing up." And the third, "The best leaders aren't the ones who fix everything. They're the ones who give people the power to fix it themselves." The next morning, Jackson sent a company-wide memo, not about metrics or sales goals, but about the culture he was rebuilding, starting with one store and one delivery driver who didn't quit. That driver had become a manager, and that store had become a model, all because someone finally paid attention. If this story moved you, share it with someone who's ever worked a thankless shift and showed up anyway. Subscribe to Real Undercover Story, where we believe real leadership begins the moment you stop pretending to have all the answers and start listening instead.